What would you do if your own reflection started moving, when you didn't? That was the question lingering in the back of Emily's mind as she and her friends pulled up the winding gravel drive, the headlights of their rented van cutting through the darkness. The mansion stood before them like a slumbering beast, its tall windows glimmering faintly under the crescent moon. Dust swirled in the headlights, and for just a moment, Emily swore she saw something flash in one of the upstairs windows, like the glint of glass, or eyes watching. "This place is insane," Jake said from the driver's seat, cutting the engine. "We're gonna be telling stories about this weekend for the rest of our lives." "Or nightmares," muttered Mia, pulling her hoodie tighter. She had always been the cautious one, the type to double-check locks and keep her back to the wall in dark places. The group, Emily, Jake, Mia, Natalie, Chris, and Mark, were college seniors, desperate to spend one last wild weekend together before graduation scattered them across the country. Renting a historic mansion through a sketchy website seemed like the perfect recipe for adventure. The listing had mentioned antique furniture, sprawling grounds, and, most interestingly, one of the finest private mirror collections in the state. None of them cared much about antiques. They cared about getting away from campus, drinking too much, and maybe scaring themselves silly in an old house that practically begged for ghost stories. But as Emily stepped out of the van, gravel crunching beneath her boots, she couldn't shake the unease that clung to the place. The air was too still, the trees around the property too silent, like they were holding their breath. The front door groaned open with surprising ease, and they filed inside, dragging duffel bags and coolers. The mansion's interior smelled of polish and age, the faint tang of wood varnish mixing with dust. In the foyer, massive mirrors lined the walls, ornate frames of gold and ebony, some cracked, others so polished they seemed like portals into another world. Their reflections stared back at them from a dozen angles, overlapping and multiplying until Emily felt dizzy. "Dude, this is like a funhouse," Chris said, grinning as he waved at his distorted reflection in a convex mirror. His laughter echoed strangely, bouncing off the glass and coming back just a beat too late, like another voice mocking him. Jake dropped their cooler on an antique rug, flopping onto a faded velvet chair. "Okay, first rule of the weekend, no horror movie cliches. No splitting up, no wandering off alone, and definitely no saying creepy stuff like, 'What could possibly go wrong?'" Mark smirked. "So basically, no fun?" They laughed, the tension breaking. But Emily couldn't stop glancing at the mirrors. Even when she wasn't directly looking, she could feel their weight pressing in, countless versions of herself staring back. The night stretched on with pizza, beer, and music echoing off the high ceilings. They explored room after room, marveling at the sheer number of mirrors, some mounted on walls, others leaning on stands, tall and thin, short and wide. They found mirrored hallways, mirrored closets, even a mirrored bathroom that made them all laugh uncomfortably as they tried not to meet their own gaze while brushing their teeth. But it wasn't until Natalie suggested checking the attic that things truly shifted. The attic was reached by a narrow staircase hidden behind a door in the hallway. The wood groaned under their weight as they climbed, the air thick with dust. Flashlights swept across covered furniture and stacks of boxes. And then, at the far end of the room, something caught Emily's eye. A mirror stood draped in a sheet, taller than any they had seen downstairs. Its frame was black and silver, tarnished with age. The sheet clung to it as if reluctant to let go. "Bet it's another antique," Chris said, already striding toward it. "Maybe it's haunted," Mia whispered, half joking, though her voice carried an edge of real fear. "Only one way to find out," Jake said, grabbing the corner of the sheet. With a dramatic flourish, he yanked it off. The mirror gleamed in the flashlight beams, its surface impossibly clear despite the dust covering everything else in the attic. Emily felt her stomach twist. The glass seemed too perfect, too smooth, as if it weren't reflecting so much as imitating. They stared at their reflections, 6 figures, dusty and tired but laughing nervously. For a moment, Emily thought she saw her reflection blink slower than she did, a fraction of a second off. Her breath caught, but when she looked again, everything was normal. "You guys feel that?" Natalie asked quietly. "Like, it's colder here?" Nobody answered. They just kept staring at the mirror, unable to look away. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed shut. And when Emily looked back at the mirror, her reflection was still staring at her, smiling faintly, even though she wasn't. For a long moment, nobody moved. Dust floated lazily through the flashlight beams, settling onto the attic floor, yet Emily's attention was locked on that mirror. Her reflection hadn't changed back, at least not quickly enough. The faint smile still lingered there, a ghost of expression that her own lips never formed. She blinked hard, rubbing her eyes, and when she looked again, her face was neutral, mirroring her fear perfectly. "Creepy, but cool," Jake said, shoving his hands into his pockets like nothing was wrong. "Bet this thing is worth a fortune. Imagine trying to move it, though." Mia frowned, stepping closer, the beam of her flashlight shaking slightly. "It feels wrong. Like it's watching us instead of reflecting us." "Mirrors can't watch," Chris laughed, though the sound cracked nervously. He waved his hand dramatically in front of the glass, and 6 hands waved back. But Emily noticed his reflection seemed to lag just a heartbeat behind, like a video buffering in poor connection. Chris didn't seem to notice, but Emily's stomach twisted again. Natalie hugged her arms around herself, her breath visible in the suddenly chill air. "We should cover it back up." Jake groaned. "Seriously? You guys are way too jumpy. It's a mirror. That's it." But Emily couldn't tear her gaze away. The surface gleamed like water, its depth endless, darker than the other mirrors in the mansion. She felt as though if she leaned forward just an inch too far, she'd fall straight into it and never stop falling. Her reflection tilted its head, exactly when she didn't. Her breath caught audibly. "Did you see that?" she whispered, voice sharp. Everyone froze, eyes flicking back to the mirror. Their reflections stood still now, perfect copies, no more and no less. Chris chuckled nervously again, scratching his neck. "Emily, you're just tired. We all are. Long drive, creepy house, brains playing tricks. Classic horror movie vibes." But Emily's heart wouldn't slow down. "No. I swear it moved on its own." "Then let's test it," Jake said, smirking. He lifted both arms like a scarecrow, waving them side to side. 6 reflections copied him. He stuck out his tongue, and 6 tongues lolled back. He spun in a circle, his baggy hoodie swinging around him. "See? Totally normal." But when his spin stopped, Emily saw it again. For just half a second, Jake's reflection was still moving. Twisting. Its head snapped around too fast, neck bending at an angle that no human spine could allow before it righted itself. Emily stumbled back with a gasp, nearly knocking over a stack of boxes. "Jake! Your reflection. Enough!" Mia snapped, her voice shaking with barely contained fear. "I don't care what anyone saw. I don't like this. Cover it up. Please." Her desperation broke the tension. Jake rolled his eyes but grabbed the sheet again, tossing it carelessly over the glass. The attic seemed to exhale all at once, the oppressive weight lifting just slightly. Still, Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. That wasn't just her imagination. She knew what she saw, the reflection wasn't bound to them. It had a will of its own. They trudged downstairs, trying to laugh it off, though the unease clung to them like damp clothes. By the time they returned to the living room, Chris had already cracked open another beer, and Jake was blasting music through his Bluetooth speaker to drown out the tension. The others forced smiles, sipping their drinks, trying to shake the attic from their minds. But Emily couldn't. Every time she caught a glimpse of herself in the smaller mirrors lining the room, she expected to see that same faint, mocking smile. She turned away from the glass, avoiding her own eyes. Later that night, long after the laughter died down and everyone drifted to their rooms, Emily lay awake on a creaky mattress in one of the upstairs bedrooms. The moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting long, pale beams across the floorboards. She rolled onto her side, staring at the antique vanity in the corner. The mirror was angled so that she could just barely see herself from where she lay. Her body was still, tucked under the blanket. But in the reflection, her arm shifted, slowly sliding out from under the covers when she hadn't moved an inch. Emily's breath froze in her throat. She wanted to scream, to call out for Natalie sleeping in the bed beside hers, but her voice was locked away, trapped in her chest. She could only watch as her reflection's hand crept down, fingers curling against the mattress. Its head tilted again, the same unnatural angle she had seen before in Jake's reflection. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Perfect stillness. Emily blinked once, twice. When she looked again, her reflection lay exactly as she was, frozen, unmoving, innocent. She pressed a hand against her mouth, heart pounding so loud she was sure it would wake the whole house. Her skin prickled with a cold sweat. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't even look away. The room felt wrong now, heavy and oppressive, as though she wasn't alone. She forced herself to sit up, shaking Natalie awake. "Did you see it? Please tell me you saw it." Natalie mumbled, half asleep. "See what?" Emily glanced back at the mirror, pointing, but it was just her again, pale and terrified, hair messy around her face. Nothing unusual. She wanted to cry. Maybe she really was losing it. Maybe Chris was right, maybe it was just exhaustion, her brain tricking her. But when she finally lay back down, pulling the blanket to her chin, she swore she felt eyes on her. Not Natalie's. Not anyone else's. Eyes that weren't even in the room, eyes watching from the other side of the glass. And just before sleep finally claimed her, she thought she heard the faintest whisper, carried not through the air but through the mirror itself, "We're waiting." Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows of the mansion, but it did little to chase away the unease that had settled over Emily. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the vanity mirror where she had seen the impossible only hours ago. In the brightness of day, the glass looked ordinary, reflecting nothing but her tired eyes and tangled hair. Yet the memory gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the certainty that her reflection had acted on its own, that the mirror wasn't a passive surface at all, but a doorway, or worse, a predator. Natalie stretched groggily and yawned. "You look like you didn't sleep a second," she mumbled, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Emily gave a humorless laugh. "I didn't. You wouldn't either if you saw what I saw." Natalie sat up, concern flickering across her face. "You're still stuck on the mirror thing?" "Stuck on it?" Emily snapped, her voice trembling more from fear than anger. "Nat, I saw myself move when I didn't. I felt it watching me." Natalie opened her mouth to argue, but the words died on her tongue. She had known Emily long enough to recognize the look in her eyes. This wasn't some dramatic prank or exaggerated story. Emily believed what she had seen. Downstairs, the rest of the group was already gathered around the long oak dining table. Plates of half-eaten breakfast sat cooling, though no one seemed particularly hungry. The tension was thick, unspoken but undeniable. Jake scrolled absently through his phone, Chris spun a spoon between his fingers, and Mia stared at her untouched toast. Finally, Mia broke the silence. "I dreamed about the mirror last night." The others glanced at her, some curious, some uneasy. She swallowed, twisting her hands in her lap. I was standing in front of it, but my reflection wasn't me." "Not exactly. It was sharper. Crueler. And it kept whispering something I couldn't hear. When I leaned closer, it leaned too, like it was trying to pull me in." Emily's stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. "That's just your brain playing tricks," Jake said quickly, brushing it off, though his voice lacked conviction. "We all know that attic creeped us out. It's natural to dream about it." Chris gave a low chuckle, though it sounded forced. "Funny you say that. Because I dreamed something too. Except mine wasn't really a dream." He hesitated, his bravado faltering. "I woke up in the middle of the night, and my reflection was standing by my bed." Everyone froze. Chris forced a laugh, waving his hand like it was nothing. "I mean, it felt like a dream, right? Probably just sleep paralysis or whatever." But no one laughed with him. The words settled heavily in the air, unshakable. Emily leaned forward, her voice low. It's not just dreams. I saw it too. Last night. My reflection moved when I didn't. It was waiting for me. Mia's eyes widened, and Natalie shifted uncomfortably. Jake slammed his phone down, shaking his head. Okay, stop. You're all feeding into each other's paranoia. It's a creepy house, fine. Old mirrors, fine. But they're not alive. This isn't some horror movie. We're making ourselves crazy. But even as he said it, Jake avoided looking into the polished cabinet beside the table, where 6 distorted versions of themselves stretched across the glassy surface. The day dragged on with a stifling heaviness. No one wanted to admit it aloud, but the mirrors were everywhere, lining the hallways, hanging above fireplaces, filling corners of rooms. Antique, dust-frosted, some cracked, some warped, all reflecting just enough to keep the group constantly aware of their own faces staring back. It was impossible to avoid them. By late afternoon, Emily had isolated herself in the library, trying to distract her mind with the thick, musty-smelling books stacked high against the shelves. But her concentration shattered when she caught something in her periphery. Across the room stood a tall, gilt-framed mirror. In it, her reflection sat at the table, head bent over a book. But when she lifted her gaze, the reflection didn't. Emily froze, heart hammering. Her reflection remained still, eyes locked on the page as though it were a mannequin of her. Slowly, too slowly, its head turned. Not with her, not in time, but after, deliberate and wrong. Its lips parted into the faintest smile, and though Emily couldn't hear it, she swore she saw the shape of words whispered from the glass. She bolted from the room, slamming the library door behind her. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees and the house fell into uneasy shadow, the group found themselves drawn together again in the living room. No one wanted to be alone anymore. The mirrors lining the walls caught the dying light, casting it back in fractured, distorted ways. It felt as though there were more people in the room than the 6 of them, dozens of figures shifting, overlapping, multiplying in the glass. Mia finally voiced the question that hung unspoken between them all. What if it's a game? The others turned toward her. She licked her lips nervously, continuing, think about it. The house is full of mirrors, right? That hidden one in the attic was different, like it was waiting. And ever since we uncovered it, things have been happening. The whispers, the movements, the dreams. What if the mirror wants something from us? What if it's pulling us into some kind of game? Great, Chris muttered, though his eyes betrayed his fear. So what? We're lab rats for some haunted mirror. Mia's hands trembled. No, worse. What if the game isn't about winning? What if it's about replacing us? A hush fell over the group. In the mirrors on the walls, their reflections seemed to stand a little straighter, their gazes sharper, more attentive, as if listening. Jake exhaled sharply, pushing to his feet. This is ridiculous. We're not cursed. We're not possessed. We're just freaking ourselves out. He stalked toward the hallway, muttering, I'm done with this. But as he passed a tall mirror near the door, Emily's breath caught in her throat. His reflection didn't follow him. It lingered, turning its head to stare directly at her, lips curling into that same, unnatural smile. Emily's voice broke as she shouted, Jake, stop. He froze, hand on the doorknob, confused. What? But by the time he turned to look, his reflection was perfectly in sync again. The others exchanged terrified glances, and Emily's words hung in the tense silence, they're not just reflections anymore. That night, no one wanted to sleep. They gathered in the living room, huddled together like children too scared to leave the glow of the fireplace. The storm outside rattled the old windows, thunder growling like some ancient beast prowling the hills. But the real storm wasn't outside, it was in the glass. Everywhere they looked, their own faces stared back, waiting, watching, shifting just slightly too late, as though rehearsing their movements before perfecting them. Emily tried to steady her breathing, her hands clenching the arm of the chair she sat in. If Mia's right, she whispered, then there are rules. There has to be. Games always have rules. Games also have losers, Chris muttered under his breath, but the joke didn't land. Natalie leaned forward, her voice trembling. What if the mirrors only move when we're not watching? Like they're practicing behind our backs. She swallowed hard, eyes darting nervously to the tall gilt-framed mirror by the door. Maybe that's why everything feels off. They're getting closer to being us. Closer to replacing us, Mia said, almost too softly to hear. Her words sent a shiver through everyone. Jake ran both hands through his hair and let out a sharp laugh. Okay, you guys are seriously losing it. Mirrors don't have rules. They don't, he cut himself off, staring into the coffee table's polished glass surface. For just a fraction of a second, his reflection was grinning back at him, wide and vicious, before blinking into perfect sync again. Jake's breath caught. He didn't say another word. Hours dragged by. Every so often, one of them would swear they saw something, a twitch, a blink, a movement out of step. It was subtle, but enough to keep their nerves wound like tight wire. When the clock struck midnight, Chris finally stood up, restless energy driving him toward the hallway. I can't do this anymore. Sitting here, waiting for something to happen, it's worse than facing it. We need answers. Maybe there's something about this house in the study, or records about the mirrors. Emily shot to her feet. You can't go alone. Chris smirked, though his face was pale. What happened to the rule about not splitting up, huh? Jake stood, squaring his shoulders. Fine. I'll go with him. The two disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, flashlights slicing through the dark. The others sat in uneasy silence, listening to the creaks of the house and the steady roar of rain on the roof. Minutes felt like hours before muffled voices echoed back down the hall. Then came Chris's panicked shout, turn it off, turn it off. Emily bolted upright, heart hammering. She sprinted toward the sound, Natalie and Mia close behind. When they reached the study, they found Chris and Jake standing rigid before a massive wall mirror. Their flashlights reflected back, but the reflections weren't holding lights at all. They were standing empty-handed, grinning ear to ear. What the hell, Natalie whispered, clapping a hand over her mouth. The reflections moved, but not in sync. One tilted its head to the side, studying them with eerie curiosity, while the other raised a hand and tapped the glass, a hollow echo that sent vibrations through the room. Then, in perfect unison, both reflections mouthed words the group couldn't hear. Jake stumbled back, dragging Chris with him. It was talking, he stammered. I swear, I heard it inside my head. It said, his voice broke. It said, one by one. Mia's face drained of color. That's the rule, she whispered. That's how the game works. One by one. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. No. No, there has to be a way to break it. To stop it. But when she turned, she caught her own reflection in a small oval mirror above the fireplace. It didn't look desperate or terrified like she felt. Instead, it was calm, smiling faintly, as if it already knew how the game would end. They stumbled back to the living room, shaken and pale. No one spoke for a long time. The storm raged, and the fire hissed low, casting flickering shadows that seemed to make the reflections dance. Finally, Natalie broke the silence, her voice hoarse. What if the mirrors are testing us? Like, they're waiting for us to make mistakes. If the game is one by one, maybe they're trying to isolate us, pick us off. Then we don't let it happen, Emily said, forcing steel into her voice despite her terror. We stay together. No matter what. It sounded good. Logical. Safe. But as the hours ticked past, exhaustion clawed at their bodies, dragging their eyelids lower. Staying together was harder than it seemed. Emily nodded off against the armchair for just a moment, and when she snapped awake, she found herself staring into the mirror above the mantel. Her reflection hadn't closed its eyes at all. Panic surged through her veins. She shook herself awake, breathing hard. The others were slumped in various chairs and couches, half asleep, half watching the mirrors. Emily wanted to scream at them to stay awake, but the words stuck in her throat when she noticed something else. In the reflection, there weren't 6 of them. There were 7. A figure stood just behind Chris in the glass, tall and blurred, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Emily whipped her head around in horror. Nothing. No one was there. But in the mirror, the 7th figure only grew clearer, its hand lifting slowly as if reaching for Chris's shoulder. Emily stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The crash jolted everyone awake, their terrified eyes darting from her to the mirrors. Chris twisted, but of course, there was nothing behind him. Only in the glass. "What is it?" Jake demanded, his voice rough with fear. Emily could barely breathe. "There's another one," she whispered. "Someone else is in the mirrors." The room plunged into silence. Each of them turned slowly toward the nearest reflective surface, terrified of what they might see. And in every single mirror, behind each of their reflections, stood faint, shadowed figures, watching. The living room had become a cage. Every mirror, every polished surface was no longer a simple reflection, it was an audience. The shadowed figures behind the glass pressed closer, their outlines sharpening with every flicker of lightning from the storm outside. Emily's skin prickled as she realized they weren't merely watching anymore, they were waiting. No one dared to move at first. The silence was broken only by the hiss of rain and the steady creak of the old mansion's bones. Then Chris stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal, running both hands through his hair. His laugh came out cracked, brittle. "No. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not sitting here waiting to be hunted like some experiment." His voice rose, nearly hysterical. "We leave. Now. Screw the storm, screw the car, screw this house, we leave." "Chris," Emily began, but he was already storming toward the hallway, grabbing his duffel bag like it could protect him from the impossible. Jake rose, trying to intercept him. "Man, you can't, look outside. We won't make it 2 miles in that storm, not on those back roads. You'll wreck the van before you even hit pavement." Chris's eyes were wild, his chest heaving. "Better a wreck than this." He jabbed a shaking finger toward the nearest mirror, where his reflection lagged by half a second, smiling faintly. "Chris, please," Mia whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. "Don't split us up. That's what they want. That's the rule, 1 by 1. If you go alone, you're handing yourself to them." But Chris wasn't listening. He yanked the front door open, rain whipping into the foyer, cold and sharp. Thunder bellowed across the hills. For one long second, the group watched him framed in the doorway, his silhouette illuminated by lightning. And then something moved. Not outside, but in the tall gilt-framed mirror beside the door. Chris's reflection didn't leave with him. It stayed. Smiling. Its hand lifted slowly, fingers curling in a mockery of a wave. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. "Chris, don't," she screamed. But he was already gone, vanishing into the night, the door slamming shut behind him. The group rushed to the window, peering out through sheets of rain. Chris was running across the gravel drive, his bag dragging at his side, his figure swallowed quickly by the storm. The van sat hunched in the distance, its windows streaked with water. They waited for him to reach it. But he never did. One moment, Chris was there, a dark figure battling the wind. The next, lightning split the sky, and his silhouette stretched unnaturally long across the ground, bending and twisting until it snapped back with a jolt. When the flash faded, the driveway was empty. Chris was gone. Mia screamed, stumbling back from the window. He disappeared. Where did he? But Emily was already turning toward the mirror by the door, her stomach churning. There, staring back at them, was Chris. His reflection hadn't left. It stood in the glass, face pressed close, grinning wider than any human mouth should stretch. And as they watched in frozen horror, the reflection raised its hand and traced words into the inside of the glass. 1. Natalie clapped a trembling hand over her mouth. Jake swore under his breath, backing away as though distance could protect him. Mia collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her sleeves. "They took him," Emily whispered, the words tasting like ash. He's not out there anymore. He's in there." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain hammered, thunder growled, and all around them, their own reflections watched in silence, except for Chris, who stood smiling from every mirror now, no matter which way they turned. The group fell apart after that. Mia curled in a corner, rocking, muttering that she didn't want to play anymore, that she wanted to go home. Natalie paced restlessly, whispering under her breath as though trying to puzzle out rules that might not even exist. Jake grabbed a bottle from the sideboard and drank until his hands stopped shaking. Emily, though, felt something different stirring beneath her terror, an awful clarity. If the mirror had rules, then Chris's disappearance proved them. One by one. The mirrors weren't going to take them all at once. They wanted patience. A slow game. The question was, how did they decide who was next? Her gaze drifted across the room, scanning the faces of her friends, then shifting inevitably to the glass where their counterparts lingered. In the farthest mirror, she caught a flicker of movement. Her reflection leaned in closer than she had, lips moving silently. Emily stared, pulse thundering. Slowly, her reflection mouthed a single word. "You." She stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. The others turned at her gasp, but by the time they looked, her reflection was back in place, innocent and perfectly synchronized. Emily didn't tell them what she had seen. The fear clawing inside her was too heavy, too personal. If the mirror had chosen her next, she wasn't about to hand that knowledge to the rest. She didn't want to see the panic in their eyes when they realized she might already be half gone. Hours passed like centuries. Sleep was impossible, though exhaustion weighed on them all. Every creak of the mansion, every flicker of lightning, every distorted grin from the mirrors dragged them closer to madness. At some point, Mia stood shakily, announcing she needed the bathroom. The others immediately protested, begging her not to go alone. Jake offered to stand outside the door. But when Mia insisted, clutching her stomach with pale fingers, they relented. Minutes passed. Too many. Emily's unease built into full-blown dread. She rose, whispering, "She's been gone too long." Together, they crept toward the hallway. The bathroom door stood ajar, light spilling onto the floor. Inside, the room was empty. The sink dripped steadily into the basin. A mirror hung above it, streaked with condensation from the steam of the storm-damp house. And in the mirror, Mia stared back at them, wide-eyed and silent, her lips mouthing words none of them could hear. Behind her reflection, the shadows gathered like vultures. The real bathroom was empty. Mia was gone. The mansion seemed larger without Chris and Mia, its hallways stretching longer, the shadows clinging heavier, as though the house itself was swallowing the missing piece of their group. Emily stood frozen in the bathroom doorway, staring at Mia's face still hovering in the mirror. The reflection blinked slowly, lips twitching in what looked like a smile, before fading into shadow. The real bathroom was empty, impossibly empty, and Emily's stomach knotted until she thought she might be sick. Natalie was the first to move, slamming the bathroom door shut as if that could trap Mia's reflection inside. "She's gone," Natalie whispered, her hands trembling as they clutched the doorframe. "Just gone. Oh God." Jake backed away, his face pale but his jaw set. "No. No, no, no. She didn't just disappear. She went somewhere. We'll find her. We'll find them both. There has to be a way to," he broke off, his voice cracking, and for the first time, his bravado slipped enough for Emily to see raw terror beneath. But the mirrors weren't patient anymore. As the three of them stumbled back into the living room, the glass along the walls rippled faintly, almost as if stirred by wind. Emily stopped dead, staring. The surface of one mirror shivered like water, and in its depths, Chris's face appeared, grinning, eyes hollow, mouthing something she couldn't hear. Another mirror rippled, showing Mia this time, her expression calm, serene even, as though she had accepted her fate. Natalie covered her ears and screamed. "Stop it! Stop showing them!" She hurled a candlestick at the nearest mirror. It shattered into jagged shards, raining down with a crash. For a brief second, Emily's heart soared. Maybe destroying them was the answer. Maybe that was how they broke the game. But then, in every remaining mirror, the shards reassembled themselves, rising up from the floor in impossible motion, knitting back together until the glass stood whole again. The reflections inside smiled wider, almost mocking. Emily's knees went weak. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "We can't break them. We can't stop them. The rules are already set." The three huddled together near the fire, the storm still raging outside. Sleep hovered over them like a predator, and every time Emily's eyes drifted, she saw movement in the glass. A hand lifting. A head tilting. A smile that didn't belong to her. Exhaustion clawed at her bones, but she bit her lip until it bled just to stay awake. Natalie, however, was unraveling fastest. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, avoiding every reflective surface. "It's us. It's us they want. But maybe they don't need all of us. Maybe if one of us," she trailed off, her eyes darting sharply toward Emily. Emily's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" Natalie stopped pacing, her voice low and ragged. "What if the game only ends when they have enough? What if we give them one, they'll stop? They'll let the rest of us go." Jake's head snapped up. "You're talking about sacrificing someone?" Natalie's hands shook, but her eyes burned with desperation. "I don't want to die here. I don't want to be dragged into that glass like Chris and Mia. If it comes down to one of us versus all of us, then isn't that better? Isn't that logical?" Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She could hardly believe what she was hearing, but at the same time, she understood. The mirrors were pushing them. Splintering their unity. Turning fear into weapon. One by one. Jake rose slowly, his voice tight. "No one is getting sacrificed. That's not how this works. If we start turning on each other, we're already finished." But Natalie's gaze lingered on Emily too long, and Emily knew. If Natalie was pushed far enough, she would choose survival over loyalty. As if sensing the fracture, the mirrors responded. From the far wall, Chris's reflection pressed its hands against the inside of the glass, lips moving soundlessly. Then Mia appeared beside him, their movements eerily in sync, both pointing toward Natalie, their faces stretched into grotesque grins. Natalie shrieked and stumbled back, knocking over a chair. "They're choosing me," she sobbed. "They're coming for me next, I can feel it." Emily grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "Natalie. Listen to me, if you let them inside your head, they'll win. That's the game, they're feeding on our fear, our mistrust." But Natalie wrenched free, stumbling toward the door. "I won't let them take me. I won't." She yanked it open, the storm screaming into the room. Rain lashed at her face as she sprinted into the night. Emily and Jake chased after her, their shoes sinking into mud, water soaking them instantly. Natalie was already halfway across the drive, her figure illuminated by lightning. But then the mirrors in the house flared like beacons. In every window pane, every shard of glass, Emily saw Natalie's reflection already waiting, standing still, smiling faintly, watching her real self run. "Nat, don't!" Jake bellowed. "It's what they want." But it was too late. Lightning split the sky, and Natalie's figure distorted, stretching impossibly long before snapping into nothing. The rain-soaked driveway was empty. Emily's scream was lost to the thunder. She spun, her eyes catching the tall mirrors glowing faintly through the windows. And there was Natalie now, smiling through the glass, mouthing one terrible word. 3. They stumbled back inside, drenched and trembling, slamming the door shut as though it could protect them. The house seemed smaller now, suffocating, the mirrors pressing in from all sides. Only Emily, Jake, and the reflections remained. Jake collapsed onto the couch, his face buried in his hands. "We're screwed," he whispered, his voice muffled. "We're screwed, Em. It's just you and me now." Emily sank beside him, her hands numb, her mind reeling. She wanted to comfort him, to say something brave, but her eyes kept drifting toward the largest mirror in the room. Her reflection stood there, smiling faintly, while Jake's mirrored counterpart leaned closer, lips moving in a whisper only Emily could see. And she realized, with a fresh wave of dread, that the mirrors had already decided who was next. The storm outside had settled into a cruel rhythm, the pounding rain and distant rolls of thunder like a heartbeat echoing through the hollow mansion. Emily sat in the dim light of the fire, her body shivering despite the heat, her mind buzzing with the weight of what she had just witnessed. Natalie's scream still echoed in her ears, a sound that hadn't come from her mouth but from her reflection, that uncanny duplicate frozen forever behind glass. The words she had mouthed, 3, replayed in Emily's mind like a curse, reminding her with every breath that the house was counting, and the game was narrowing toward its inevitable end. Jake sat slouched against the couch, his hair dripping from the rain, his face pale and hollowed out by exhaustion. He had always been the strongest of them, the one who barked orders during hikes, who joked too loudly when the woods grew too quiet, who fought the mirrors with stubborn defiance. But now he looked fragile, a man slowly breaking under the relentless pressure of things he couldn't explain or fight. His eyes flicked constantly to the nearest mirror, the one above the fireplace, and Emily realized with growing dread that he was no longer avoiding the glass, he was watching it, waiting for something, as though a silent conversation was already happening between him and his reflection. Emily reached for him, placing a hand on his trembling shoulder. "Jake," she whispered, forcing her voice steady, "don't look at it. That's what they want. They'll use it to get inside your head." He gave a bitter laugh, low and humorless, never taking his eyes off the glass. "Maybe it's already too late. Maybe they're already inside. I keep hearing them, Em. They talk to me when I close my eyes. They show me things I don't want you to see." His voice cracked, and his jaw clenched tight as he dragged a hand across his face, smearing mud and sweat into streaks. "They told me Natalie didn't just die. She chose to stay with them. She's safe now. Better off." Emily's throat went dry. She shook her head fiercely, trying to anchor them both in reason. "That's not true, Jake. That's exactly what they want you to believe. You saw her, she didn't choose. They took her, just like Chris, just like Mia. If you give in to them, you'll be next." Jake's reflection leaned forward in the mirror, grinning faintly as though mocking Emily's words. His mirrored self's lips moved, forming silent syllables. Jake's eyes widened as though he heard them loud and clear. His whole body stiffened, then relaxed into a strange calm. Emily watched in horror as he whispered back to the glass, lips moving in response. "Jake!" Emily shook him harder now, her nails digging into his arm. "Don't listen. They're not real, they're shadows, parasites." But Jake's eyes were glassy, fixed on the reflection. His voice was eerily calm when he spoke. "What if they are real, Em? What if the versions in the mirrors are us, the better us? Stronger. Smarter. Not weak and afraid like this. Maybe that's where we belong." Emily's stomach churned with panic. She could see the mirror's surface quiver, as if rippling water separated them from its depths. Jake's reflection smiled wider, raising a hand and pressing it flat against the inside of the glass. Slowly, as though pulled by invisible strings, Jake raised his own trembling hand, mirroring the motion. Their palms met, flesh on one side, cold glass on the other. The firelight flickered across the room, casting shifting shadows that made it look, for an instant, like the two Jakes were perfectly aligned, one reality bleeding into the other. Emily lunged forward, grabbing Jake's arm and yanking it down before he could push further into the glass. "Stop! Do you hear yourself? That's not you, it's a trap. If you give them your hand, they'll take the rest of you too." Jake ripped his arm free, his face twisting between fury and despair. "Why fight it, Em? We've already lost. Do you think we'll make it out of here? Look around you." He gestured wildly at the walls, every mirror shimmering faintly with the distorted faces of their missing friends. Chris, Mia, Natalie, all watching. all smiling. They're waiting for us. Don't you get it? There's no end to this game unless we join them. Maybe that's the only way out. Emily's tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to stand tall, her voice breaking yet determined. No. That's not the way out. That's surrender. That's death, Jake. We can't give them what they want. For a long moment, he just stared at her, torn between her words and the siren call of the mirror. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost a sigh, he said, I'm tired of fighting. Before Emily could stop him, Jake pressed both hands against the mirror. The surface shivered, swallowing his skin up to the wrists like liquid. His reflection grasped his arms eagerly, yanking hard. Jake's body convulsed, half of him already dissolving into the glass. Emily screamed and threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pulling with all the strength she had left. Jake! Don't let go! Fight it, she cried, her muscles straining, her lungs burning with effort. She could feel the icy suction of the mirror tugging him away, could see his reflection's face twisted into a grotesque grin as it dragged him deeper inside. For a heartbeat, Jake fought back, his eyes flickering with something human again. His lips parted as if to say her name, but then his reflection pulled harder, and his body jerked violently forward. Emily's grip slipped. With a final, deafening crack like shattering ice, Jake vanished into the glass, his scream cut short as though swallowed whole. The mirror rippled once, then stilled. Only Emily remained, crumpled on the floor, sobbing into the silence. When she looked up, the glass showed Jake's reflection smiling faintly, his eyes eerily calm now, his lips forming a single, unspoken word. 4. The mansion groaned as though acknowledging the tally. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows, shaking the very walls. Emily wiped her face with trembling hands, her body numb, her mind reeling with shock. She was alone now. Alone with the mirrors, the reflections, and the game that would not end until the last move was made. As the fire burned low, the largest mirror in the room pulsed faintly with light. Emily's reflection stepped closer inside it, tilting its head, smiling in cruel invitation. And she understood with chilling clarity, the game had saved the final round for her. The silence after Jake's disappearance was suffocating, heavier than the thunderstorm outside, heavier even than the shadows pressing in from every corner of the room. Emily sat on the floor where she had fallen, her hands still shaking from the futile grip she tried to maintain on her friend, the phantom echo of his scream lodged in her ears like a splinter. The mirrors had taken them all, Chris, Mia, Natalie, Jake. One by one, just as the rules had promised. She was the last. And though she wanted desperately to deny it, to cling to some shred of hope, she could feel it in her bones, the game wasn't over yet. It was waiting. It was circling. It was closing in. The fire had almost died, glowing embers the only source of warmth in the cavernous room. Shadows stretched long and thin across the floor, swallowing the corners, dancing against the mirror frames that seemed to multiply around her. Every reflective surface glimmered faintly, as though alive, and within them, her friends' faces hovered, smiling, calm, wrong. They didn't look trapped or afraid anymore, they looked complete, content, as if the mirror world had erased their fear and replaced it with something far more sinister. Emily pushed herself unsteadily to her feet. Her body felt like lead, but her heart was pounding with a desperate rhythm. You want me, don't you? She whispered into the silence. Her voice was hoarse, but the words hung heavy in the air. You've been waiting for me. The largest mirror in the room, a towering gilt monstrosity stretching nearly from floor to ceiling, quivered faintly as though in response. Emily's reflection stepped forward inside it, separating itself from her movements. It didn't mimic her anymore, it acted, deliberate and precise, like an independent being wearing her skin. Emily felt her knees weaken. She had feared this moment, but some part of her had always known it would come. So it's you, she breathed. The last round. Her reflection smiled faintly, tilting its head the way a predator studies prey. Then, with agonizing slowness, it lifted its hand and wrote something across the glass with an invisible finger. The letters burned faintly into the surface, shimmering like frost. One must stay. Emily's chest tightened. She staggered back, shaking her head violently. No. No, I'm not playing your game. I'm not staying here. I won't. The reflection only smirked wider, and behind it, the other mirrors flickered. Chris, Mia, Natalie, Jake, all lined up like obedient soldiers in their glass prisons, nodding in unison. And as they nodded, the reflection traced another phrase on the glass. One must replace. Emily's breath caught. The meaning was clear. For the game to end, someone had to remain on the other side. Someone had to take the mirror's place, fill the void, complete the circle. She had seen it happen with the others, felt the pull, fought against the invisible hands trying to drag them in. Now it was her turn. And the reflection was patient. It wasn't lunging, wasn't rushing. It was offering her the choice. She backed away until her shoulders hit the cold stone wall. Why me? Why us? She demanded, her voice rising into a ragged shout. What do you want from us? The reflection's grin widened into something grotesque, too wide, splitting its face like a wound. The shadows in the room lengthened, writhing, and though the reflection's mouth didn't move, a voice slithered through Emily's skull, low, echoing, impossible to pin down. We are the other side. We are the echoes you leave behind. We wait in glass until called. And when the game begins, we hunger for balance. One for one. One for all. Emily's stomach churned. It was madness. But at the same time, it explained everything, the whispers, the mimicry, the way the reflections grew bolder, freer with every passing night. They weren't just imitations. They were predators waiting to step out of their cages, and every soul pulled into the mirrors gave them more power. Her reflection pressed its palm against the inside of the glass. Emily felt a faint tug in her chest, the pull she had seen take Jake, Natalie, the others. A sharp, icy current crawled up her spine, whispering promises of release, of rest, of being free from fear. She shook her head violently, trying to shove the thought away. No, she gasped. You don't get to decide. I won't stay. I won't be your last piece. The reflection tilted its head again and mouthed a single word. Then choose. The air in the room shifted, and the mirrors around her trembled violently. The faces of her friends flickered in the glass, their mouths opening silently, pleading, urging. Emily realized with a sick lurch that the game wasn't demanding only her surrender, it was demanding her decision. If one must stay, perhaps she didn't have to be the one. Perhaps she could condemn someone else, someone she loved, in her place. Her stomach twisted with nausea. It was a trick, she told herself. Another manipulation. But the thought crawled in and sank deep. You could survive. You could leave. If you choose. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands to her ears to block out the whispers, the storm, the sound of her heartbeat hammering. No, she whispered fiercely. You won't break me. You won't turn me into you. When she opened her eyes again, her reflection was standing inches away inside the glass, its smile gone, its expression hard and cold. It slammed its palms against the mirror from the inside, the sound like thunder cracking through the room. The glass rippled violently, and Emily stumbled backward, covering her face. The mansion groaned around her, mirrors rattling on the walls, the storm screaming louder outside. Emily's reflection pressed harder against the glass, its hands stretching impossibly far until the fingertips began to push through the surface like liquid silver. This was it. The final move. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. Her mind screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mansion was nothing but glass and shadows, a cage built to keep her here. If she wanted to live, she had to fight, had to find a way to turn the game against itself. For the first time in days, a surge of defiance burned in her chest, hot enough to cut through the terror. She clenched her fists and locked eyes with her reflection, whispering through her teeth, if one must stay, maybe it'll be you. Emily's chest rose and fell in ragged gasps as she stood in the flickering glow of the dying fire, her fists trembling, her eyes locked on the figure in the mirror that wore her face. The storm outside howled louder, as though the mountain itself was leaning into the mansion, pressing its weight upon the house until the walls rattled and the glass quivered in their frames. Every mirror in the room pulsed faintly with light, dozens of reflections staring back at her, Chris's face smirking, Mia's eyes glowing faintly, Natalie's smile sharpened into something cruel, Jake's lips mouthing that cursed word, "for." And at the center of it all stood her reflection, stepping closer and closer inside the glass, its fingers stretching outward like claws pressing against a thin barrier. Emily could feel the air vibrating with pressure, the glass humming with a frequency that set her teeth on edge. The voices in her head returned, whispers layered on top of one another, hissing secrets, temptations, demands. One must stay. One must replace. One must choose. She pressed her hands to her temples, desperate to block them out, but the voices burrowed deeper, filling her skull until it felt like her head might crack open. "No," she growled through clenched teeth, her voice raw, her throat aching. "You don't get to decide. I won't be your prisoner. I won't be your replacement." Her gaze darted to the fireplace poker leaning against the hearth. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, a weapon, small, fragile, but steel nonetheless. Something solid, something real, something that wasn't glass and shadow and trickery. Her reflection's eyes narrowed, reading her thoughts. The lips moved inside the mirror, slow and deliberate. "Try." Emily lunged, snatching the poker, gripping it so tightly her knuckles went white. The weight of it steadied her, gave her focus. For a moment she almost believed she had power again, that she could fight. With a strangled scream, she swung the poker against the nearest mirror, a tall, narrow frame on the wall beside the fireplace. The glass exploded in a shower of shards, raining across the floor like glittering ice. For a heartbeat, relief surged through her chest. But the relief lasted only seconds. From the shattered frame, darkness poured, not smoke, not shadow, but a writhing, tar-like mass that spilled across the floor, seething and twitching like something alive. The faces of Chris, Mia, and Natalie flickered in the shards at her feet, but their mouths were no longer smiling, they were screaming, distorted, begging. The writhing black tendrils stretched upward, licking at the ceiling, before slithering back into the walls, vanishing into cracks as if the house itself had devoured them. Emily staggered backward, horror clawing at her throat. Breaking the glass hadn't freed anyone. It had unleashed them. The other mirrors shuddered violently, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Emily's reflection tilted its head, still smiling faintly, then raised one hand and curled its fingers inward in a mock invitation. Again. Her grip on the poker tightened, her breath heaving. Fear told her to stop, to drop the weapon, to run, but instinct told her the opposite. If she did nothing, the game would end with her inside the glass, just like the rest of them. She had to fight, even if every strike brought worse consequences. So she swung again. The poker cracked against another mirror, a long oval piece above the mantel. It shattered into 1,000 fragments, and each shard bled shadows into the air, shapes that twisted into malformed versions of her friends. For a few terrifying seconds, Emily found herself surrounded by them, phantom silhouettes of Chris reaching out, Mia whispering with no sound, Natalie crying tears of black liquid. They staggered toward her like puppets jerking on invisible strings. She lashed out wildly with the poker, striking through them, only for their bodies to scatter into smoke and reform on the other side. The whispers roared louder now, no longer just in her head but echoing from every wall, every surface, until the mansion felt alive, vibrating with the fury of something ancient and hungry. One must stay. One must stay. One must stay. Emily dropped to her knees, pressing her palms against the cold stone floor, fighting the weight of the words crushing her mind. But even on her knees she refused to surrender. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself up again, dragging the poker with her, sweat dripping into her eyes, heart hammering like it would burst. "You want someone to stay?" she screamed at the mirrors, her voice cracking with both terror and rage. "Then take yourself. Take what you made." She swung the poker with all her strength at the largest mirror, the towering gilt frame that housed her reflection. The impact cracked like thunder, the glass spiderwebbing instantly, jagged fractures tearing across its surface. Emily's reflection staggered inside the mirror, its grin faltering for the first time, its movements glitching like a broken puppet. She swung again, harder, the poker sparking against the frame, shattering more of the glass. Her reflection's mouth opened in a silent scream as the fractures spread, its body splitting into shards that twisted into fragments of her own face, hundreds of versions of her eyes, her mouth, her skin, all overlapping, all screaming silently from the cracks. The mirror pulsed violently, sucking air into itself like a vortex. Emily staggered, nearly pulled forward by the force, shards of glass lifting off the floor and swirling around her like deadly snow. The faces of her friends flickered in every shard, their screams finally breaking into sound, a chorus of agony and rage. The mansion shook, beams creaking, plaster raining from the ceiling. Emily gritted her teeth, raising the poker one last time, and drove it into the heart of the reflection. The mirror exploded. A deafening boom shook the entire house, knocking Emily off her feet, slamming her against the wall. Shards tore across the room like shrapnel, slicing into her arms, her cheek, her legs. The lights went out, plunging everything into blackness. Only the howl of the storm and the ringing in her ears filled the silence that followed. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in the middle of the living room, surrounded by jagged glass. The reflections were gone. Every mirror was shattered. The house was silent at last. Emily's breath came in shaky bursts, each inhale filling her chest with sharp pain. Slowly, painfully, she sat up, staring at the ruins around her. For the first time since arriving, she could no longer feel the weight of the mirrors watching her. She was alone. Or so she thought. She caught sight of one shard near her hand. It was no larger than her palm, sharp edges glinting faintly in the moonlight. And in it, she saw herself, but not as she was. The reflection blinked a moment too late, its lips curling into a smile. Emily's stomach plummeted. The mirrors might have shattered, but the game wasn't over. The silence after the explosion was suffocating, as if the house itself had drawn a breath and refused to release it. Emily sat motionless in the wreckage, the poker still clutched weakly in her blood-slicked hand, her body trembling from the violence of what had just happened. Dust floated lazily in the air, settling on broken furniture and splintered frames, while moonlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating the battlefield she had created. Every mirror was gone, shattered into hundreds, maybe thousands, of fragments that littered the floor like jagged stars scattered across a dark sky. For one fleeting moment, she let herself believe it was over. She had fought back. She had destroyed the prison. She had broken their grip. But then she noticed it, the soft flicker, the subtle movement where there should have been none. Her eyes fell on the shard nearest her hand, and her breath hitched. The reflection inside wasn't hers, not really. It looked like her, yes, but the timing was wrong. The blink came a fraction of a second too late, the tilt of the head was unnatural, and the smile that curled across its lips was not one she would ever wear. Emily snatched her hand back as if the shard might burn her, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs would crack. She looked around, panic swelling in her chest. Every shard of glass gleamed faintly, each one catching the moonlight, each one reflecting her face, or rather, versions of her face. Some smiled, others frowned, some wept black tears, and others bared teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. They weren't passive reflections anymore. They were alive, multiplied, and watching her. She realized with a sick twist in her gut that in shattering the mirrors, she hadn't destroyed the evil. She had scattered it. Broken the prison into 1,000 cages. And now, each shard was a doorway. The whispers returned, no longer distant but rising all around her in a cacophony. They didn't echo in her mind this time, they poured directly from the shards, hundreds of tiny voices murmuring, chanting, mocking. Words she couldn't quite understand overlapped in an endless, suffocating chorus, like a swarm of insects buzzing inside her ears. She pressed her hands against the sides of her head, trying to shut them out, but the sound crawled beneath her skin, vibrating through her bones. Her reflection in the nearest shard leaned closer, its lips moving faster, whispering secrets only it seemed to know. "You can't break us. You only made more." Emily staggered to her feet, shards crunching beneath her boots, the poker dragging against the floor. Every step felt heavy, as though the mansion itself resisted her movement. The air was thick, charged, humming with energy. Her eyes darted to the doors, the windows, any possible escape. But each time she tried to focus on a way out, her gaze was pulled back to the shards, to the army of faces that mimicked her every breath, every twitch, except when they didn't. And it was in those moments, the lag, the deliberate misstep, that she saw the truth. They weren't her at all. They were something else wearing her skin, something that had been waiting for this moment, this mistake. Her chest tightened, nausea rising as she realized the full horror of it. Each shard was not just a reflection. Each was a piece of her, splintered, divided, corrupted. And the more shards there were, the weaker she became, as though her essence had been fractured along with the glass. She could feel it, a draining tug deep in her chest, as though invisible strings connected her body to the fragments, pulling threads of her soul into each one. She swayed, lightheaded, and caught herself against the wall, her bloody hand leaving a smear across the faded wallpaper. Then one of the shards moved. It slid an inch across the floor, scraping against the stone with a high, shrill squeal. Emily froze, eyes widening. The shard trembled, then tipped upright, balancing impossibly on its jagged edge. And then another did the same. And another. One by one, the shards rose, tilting upright like 100 tiny mirrors angling themselves toward her. She was surrounded, a circle of glass tightening, each piece pulsing faintly with its own light. And in every shard, a different version of her stared back, some calm, some furious, some broken and sobbing, others wide-eyed and hungry. Emily's breath hitched as her legs nearly gave out. Her throat worked, but no words came. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Her only instinct was to fight, to swing the poker and smash the shards into dust. But the thought froze in her mind. What if dust was worse? What if every splinter, every grain, every microscopic piece still carried her reflection? How small could you break a prison before it multiplied beyond control? She clenched her jaw, gripping the poker so hard her hands shook, but she didn't swing. Not yet. The voices grew louder, sharper, more distinct. She could hear words now, phrases that stabbed into her chest like knives. "You left us. We are you. We will take turns. One must stay." The chant rose into a rhythm, pounding against her skull in time with her heartbeat. Emily's ears rang, her vision blurred, and she staggered back, bumping into the cracked mantel. Her reflection in the largest shard grinned, its lips parting to reveal rows of teeth like splintered glass. It lifted its hand, her hand, and pressed it against the inside of the shard, as though trying to break through. Then, slowly, the surface of the shard began to ripple, like water disturbed by a drop of rain. The reflection's fingers sank into it, distorting as though the glass had become liquid. Emily gasped, stumbling back in terror. The shard was no longer just a window. It was a doorway. And it was opening. One by one, the other shards began to ripple too, their reflections reaching forward, pressing against the barriers, fingers elongating, faces stretching grotesquely. The circle of shards pulsed, the light from within them growing brighter, the whispers rising into a roar. Emily's body shook violently, her skin prickling as though 1,000 invisible hands clawed at her. She wanted to scream, to run, to smash everything into nothing, but a deeper terror rooted her to the spot. She knew, instinctively, that if even one reflection crossed through, there would be no going back. The poker slipped in her sweaty grip. She tightened her hold and raised it, her voice breaking in a hoarse, desperate scream. "No! You don't get to take me!" The shards roared back in unison, the sound a perfect mimic of her own voice, multiplied 100-fold. Her own scream bounced around her, surrounding her, smothering her. The walls shook, the ceiling cracked, and the house groaned as if it, too, would shatter. Emily staggered to the center of the room, shards forming a prison around her, her own army of corrupted selves closing in. She knew she couldn't win by breaking them. She couldn't outrun them, couldn't outfight them. If every shard was a piece of her, then the only way to stop them was to reclaim them. But how? The answer struck like lightning, terrible and dangerous. She had to touch them. Had to take herself back, even if it meant tearing pieces of her soul from the jaws of whatever had stolen them. Her eyes locked on the nearest shard, where a version of herself stared back with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched shut. She stepped forward, trembling, the poker slipping from her grip and clattering uselessly to the floor. Slowly, she reached out her hand. The shard's surface rippled like black water as her fingers brushed it, cold, searing, alive. The reflection's stitched mouth tore open in a silent scream. And Emily felt it, something rushing into her chest, slamming into her lungs, her heart, her mind. Pain exploded through her skull, blinding and unbearable, but she held on, fingers digging into the shard's edges, cutting herself, blood dripping down her wrist. She pulled, yanking with every ounce of strength she had left, until the reflection shattered with a shriek, dissolving into her body. She stumbled back, gasping, her knees buckling. The other shards pulsed violently, their reflections screaming now, furious, hungry. And Emily realized the truth. She would have to do it again. And again. And again. Until every piece was hers again, or until she was nothing but glass. Emily knelt in the center of the wreckage, her hands bleeding from the jagged edges of glass, her chest heaving like she'd run 1,000 miles uphill. The shards she had absorbed still pulsed within her like a burning coal, heat radiating through her veins, scorching every nerve. It felt alien, as though something else lived in her skin, squirming, reshaping her. Yet beneath the pain was a flicker of strength, a return of something she hadn't even realized had been stolen. It was as though she had taken back a piece of her own heartbeat, a stolen breath. But that tiny reclamation came at a cost, and Emily could feel it in the way her hands trembled, in the way shadows seemed to cling to her more hungrily now. The shards around her quivered, their reflections howling silently, furious at her defiance. They weren't going to let her finish this easily. The next shard glimmered to her left, rocking slightly as if drawn by invisible tides. Its reflection was monstrous, a version of her hunched and skeletal, skin pulled tight over bone, eyes sunken and black, lips cracked and bleeding. The sight made bile rise in her throat, but she forced herself closer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she remembered the hollow ache of losing herself in those mirrors, the way her identity had been scattered like dust. This was the only way back. With trembling fingers, she reached out. The surface was colder this time, so cold her skin stuck to it like frostbite. Her reflection's lips parted, and a long, rattling breath escaped, carrying with it the sound of her own sobbing. She wanted to recoil, to scream, but she gritted her teeth and pressed harder, forcing her hand flat against the shard. The world cracked. 1,000 memories not her own surged through her mind, but they were hers too, old fears she'd buried, shame she thought forgotten, fragments of nightmares she'd locked away. She saw herself as a child, alone in the dark, whispering apologies to shadows that never answered. She saw the lies she had told, the betrayals she had convinced herself were harmless. Every ugly thought, every cruel moment, every weakness came rushing back, magnified, screaming. She clawed at her temples, shrieking as the reflection shattered and dissolved into her chest. It hit her like a hammer, dropping her to her knees. For a moment, she wasn't sure she could breathe, her lungs filling with something thick and heavy, but then it passed, leaving her gasping on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The circle of shards shrieked louder now, their reflections slamming fists, teeth, claws against their prisons. They hated her for this. They feared her for this. And Emily knew why, because with every shard she absorbed, she was becoming whole again, and wholeness meant power. But that power came with a price she wasn't sure she could keep paying. The third shard rose before her, trembling violently as though resisting her touch. Its reflection was smiling, her smile, but stretched too wide, teeth gleaming, eyes sparkling with delight that was wrong, poisonous. Emily's stomach churned. She didn't want this one. She didn't want to admit that such a version of her existed, that deep down, she was capable of cruelty, of joy in another's suffering. But the shard pulsed, pulling at her blood like a magnet, and she knew there was no choice. Slowly, shaking, she reached out, fingertips brushing the surface. The reflection's grin widened, eyes blazing as though it had been waiting for her. The impact was worse than before. She reeled backward, clutching her stomach as laughter, not hers, boomed inside her skull. It rolled through her body, violent and jagged, until she was laughing too, unwilling, choking on the sound. Her body convulsed, muscles jerking against her will, her mouth splitting into that same twisted grin. For a moment she was sure she was lost, that this shard would take her completely, and she would laugh forever in this nightmare. But she screamed, a guttural sound ripped from the core of her being, and slammed her fist into the floor, cutting her knuckles on broken glass. The pain snapped her back, grounding her, reminding her that she was still here, still fighting. The reflection dissolved, its laughter dying inside her chest, leaving a hollow ache where joy should have been. Emily sagged against the wall, her body a patchwork of blood and bruises, her mind fraying at the edges. She didn't know how many shards were left, dozens, maybe hundreds, but each one called to her now, vibrating with hunger, with anger. She could feel the threads binding them to her, stretching, pulling, threatening to tear her apart if she failed to reclaim them all. Her head lolled back, eyes flicking to the ceiling, where cracks spiderwebbed across plaster as if the house itself were collapsing under the weight of her war. But when she looked down again, she froze. The shards were moving. Not rising one by one anymore, but sliding together, pulling into clusters, reforming. Where once there had been countless tiny fragments, now they fused into larger pieces, 3, 4, 5 feet tall, each becoming a near full-length mirror. And in each one, a different Emily stood. One was draped in shadow, faceless and silent. Another was smeared with blood, holding the poker she'd dropped earlier. Another was bound in chains, her eyes burning with rage. They weren't fragments anymore. They were whole. Whole enough to move. The whispers grew teeth, turning into words sharp enough to slice through her resolve. You will never take us back. You don't deserve to be whole. The reflections stepped closer, their bodies pressing against the glass like predators testing the bars of a cage. The surfaces rippled, bulging outward. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of iron and rot. Emily stumbled to her feet, her limbs weak but her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ownership. She had to prove she belonged to herself. Her bloodied hands curled into fists. Her voice, hoarse but steady, rang out through the chaos, "You are me. And I am not afraid of myself." The reflection sneered, grinned, wept, snarled. And then, as if accepting her challenge, the mirrors burst outward, the versions of her stepping free, glass crunching beneath their bare feet. The room spun with their presence, a circle of living, breathing shadows of Emily, each more terrifying than the last. She was no longer facing shards. She was facing herself, multiplied, corrupted, and hungry. The real battle had just begun. The room pulsed like a living thing, the air heavy with static, the floor trembling beneath Emily's bare feet as if the house itself were struggling to contain what had been unleashed. Around her, the circle of doppelgangers tightened, each twisted reflection moving with her cadence but no longer bound by her hesitation. They were not fragments anymore. They were whole enough to breathe, to walk, to stalk her like predators circling prey. One dragged the poker she had dropped, its edge shrieking against the floor, sparks flickering with every scrape. Another's skin was pale as porcelain, its veins black and bulging, eyes hollow pits. A third stood with its arms bound by chains that rattled with each step, yet it smiled with a hunger that froze Emily's blood. All of them were her, yet none of them were her. They were everything she feared she could become, everything she had denied, everything she had lost when the mirror first fractured her soul. Emily's chest heaved, but beneath the fear there was a sharp edge of clarity. These weren't invincible monsters. They were hers. Every one of them was tethered to her, born from her essence. And if she had the strength to absorb shards, she could absorb them too. But this would not be like touching glass, it would be flesh against flesh, soul against soul. The thought terrified her, but hesitation was no longer an option. The reflections were closing in. The first lunged, grinning, wild-eyed, wielding the poker with unnatural strength. Emily ducked just as the iron crashed against the wall, splintering wood. Shards of plaster rained down, stinging her skin. She rolled, grabbing a piece of broken mirror from the floor, its edge biting into her palm. The reflection wheeled around, swinging again. Emily thrust the shard upward, catching its wrist. Their eyes locked, hers wide with determination, its blazing with fury. The surface of the shard rippled where their skin touched, and Emily seized the chance. She pressed harder, screaming as the reflection's skin melted into hers, its grin twisting into a silent snarl as it dissolved, piece by piece, sucked into her body. The pain was unbearable, as though she were swallowing fire, but when it was gone, she felt stronger, her grip steadier, her breath deeper. One down. Too many left. The others reacted instantly, their whispers rising into a deafening roar. Two came at her at once, the chained one dragging iron links across the floor, and the pale one gliding silently, its black eyes locked on hers. Emily backed into the wall, her chest tight with terror. The pale one reached first, fingers like claws swiping for her throat. She caught its hand, forcing herself to hold on despite the chill that seeped into her veins. Its mouth opened in a scream that sounded like hers, only hollow, broken. The chains rattled louder as the other lunged, slamming into her side, the cold iron cutting into her arms. Pinned between them, Emily thought she would suffocate, but rage sparked in her chest. "You are mine," she roared, slamming her forehead into the pale one's skull. The world spun as pain blossomed across her brow, but the impact loosened its grip. She clawed at its face, fingers sinking past skin that rippled like liquid glass, and pulled it into her. The scream echoed in her skull as it disappeared inside her, leaving her gasping for air. The chained version wrapped her in its iron embrace, tightening, squeezing the breath from her lungs. The chains weren't just physical, they bit into her mind, dragging up memories of every time she'd felt trapped, every time she'd been too afraid to act. She screamed against the weight of it, her vision blurring. But in that suffocating darkness, something inside her broke free. She braced her feet, twisted, and sank her bloodied hands into the reflection's chest. The chains rattled violently as she pulled, dragging it screaming into her own body, reclaiming its strength and its pain. She staggered, free, swaying on unsteady legs. Sweat and blood mingled down her face, her breaths ragged. The remaining reflections snarled, their whispers turning into shrieks of rage. They weren't going to let her win. Not now, not when she was so close. Then the largest mirror stirred. At the far end of the room, taller than all the rest, stood a single pane of glass that hadn't shattered, hadn't fractured. Its surface rippled like black water, and from it stepped a reflection so perfect, so complete, that Emily's heart stopped. This wasn't a twisted fragment. This wasn't a shard. This was her. Entire, unblemished, beautiful, and yet wrong in ways words could never describe. The reflection smiled, and for the first time, Emily felt true dread. "I am the whole," it said, its voice smooth, melodic, terrifying in its calmness. "You are the broken. You were always the broken." Emily shook her head, sweat dripping into her eyes. "No. You're what the mirror made of me. You're not real." The reflection tilted its head, amused. "Not real? Look at yourself. Bleeding. Weak. Clinging to scraps. You are nothing but fragments pieced together. I am the complete one. I am what you should have been." The other reflections stilled, bowing their heads slightly, as though recognizing a master. Emily's stomach churned. This was it. The core. The original. The true parasite. The mirror hadn't just split her, it had created a perfect copy, flawless and whole, built from everything she had given away. And now it wanted to take her place. The reflection stepped closer, its movements graceful, predatory. "You can reclaim fragments, but you can never reclaim me." Because without me, you are incomplete. And if you try to take me, it smiled, teeth glinting like shards. We both die. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She knew it was telling the truth. This wasn't just another fight. This was the final choice: let the reflection win, or risk obliterating herself by trying to absorb it. She looked around at the chaos, the shattered room, the fragments of herself she had already reclaimed, the broken house that had been her prison. Her fear trembled inside her, but beneath it, something stronger rose. She stepped forward, bloodied hands steady now. Then we die. The reflection's smile faltered. With a roar that shook the walls, Emily lunged, slamming into the reflection, her hands locking around its throat. Its skin rippled like water, cold and searing all at once, its features shifting between hers and something inhuman. They struggled, two halves locked in a war that was never meant to end. Emily's vision went white, her body convulsing as the reflection poured into her, pulling at her soul, tearing her apart from the inside. She screamed, not in pain, but in defiance, dragging it into herself with every ounce of will she had left. The reflection fought back, clawing, shrieking, trying to consume her instead. Their voices overlapped until the air shook with the sound of their battle. And then, silence. Emily collapsed onto the glass-strewn floor, her chest rising and falling, her body trembling. The shards around her were dark now, lifeless. No whispers. No reflections. Just her. Entire. Whole. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pain coursing through her, and looked into the one surviving mirror, cracked but intact. For the first time, her reflection moved with her perfectly. No lag. No distortion. Just her. Tears welled in her eyes, relief flooding her chest. But then, as she turned away, her reflection did not. It smiled. Emily fought to reclaim herself, believing she had won. But the last reflection, the perfect copy, didn't vanish, it hid, waiting in her mirror, biding its time. She may think she's free, but the true battle is far from over.